Hey, Frog fans, welcome into the Frogs Insider Podcast, presented by the Flying T Club. I'm your host, Jamie Plunkett. Melissa Treebwasser will be along shortly. This is the first preview episode of the season. If you'll recall, last year we moved to a 2-episode-a-week schedule during the football season to help better accommodate all of the stuff we needed to talk about. So, from here on out, the rest of the football season, you'll be able to get us twice a week in your ears wherever you get your podcasts or over on the YouTube channel, which, folks, I just want to take a second and say thank you. We got over the 500 subscriber threshold earlier this week. I think we're pushing. We might be on our way to 600 at this point. It's been absolutely nuts, the level of support you guys are showing us. We are so thankful. For those of you that have been listening since day one, all the way back in 2014 when we were still with Frogs of War, doing the Frogs of War podcast, through our time at other places, to now, just thank you for the support. It means a tremendous amount. We're actually starting to tend to our YouTube channel for the first time in the history of doing stuff like this, and you guys have showed out over there. It's so much fun to see that community grow as well, and we hope to continue to do that. This season is going to present that perfect opportunity with player interviews, coach interviews, all provided by the Flying T Club, our wonderful sponsoring, a partner sponsor, our presenting sponsor, TCU's NIL Collective. Thankful for them, thankful for their partnership. You can learn more about the Flying T Club over at flyingtclub.com. You can subscribe to the Frogs Insider podcast over at YouTube. Maybe we'll do something else for 1,000 subscribers. Patience with the smelling salts. We are acquiring them, and we will be doing those on the next episode once TCU and Stanford have played. We sit down to talk about, hopefully, a Horned Frogs victory. So, thank you to everybody who has subscribed over at YouTube. Thank you if you have subscribed wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave a rating and a review. Share with a friend. We want to continue to grow the show so that the Horned Frog community can hear this content and can see all of the interviews that we're going to be doing this fall. Big thanks to all of you who have already done something along those lines. Again, presented by the Flying T Club. Thankful for their partnership. Go to theflyingtclub.com. See all the great work they're doing, not only with TCU student athletes, but one of the cool things that I really do like about the Flying T Club is that they're a 501c3 nonprofit, one of the only NIL collectives in the country to maintain that status. And it's because of the work they do locally with organizations in and around Fort Worth that allows them to have that status, allows you to write off your donations to the Flying T Club. And really, truly, it kind of represents what TCU and Fort Worth are all about. Just this community effort to make sure that everyone's pulling in the same direction, to make sure that everybody has opportunity, everybody has what they need. The Flying T Club is doing that in just an immeasurable way all across the city of Fort Worth and with TCU student athletes. So flyingtclub.com, go over there and see how you can get involved today. Also, big shout out to our podcast network, the Republic of Football Network, over at Dave Campbell's Texas Football. If you want more than just TCU content, you can get over to the Republic of Football Network wherever you get your podcasts, and you will get a single stream that has podcasts for every D1 football program in the state of Texas. We're talking UT and A&M, obviously TCU with me and Melissa here at Frogs Insider, but also Rice and Sam Houston and UTEP and UTSA and North Texas and, yes, Texas Tech and Baylor and SMU as well, if that's something that you're interested in. So get over to the Republic of Football Network, wherever you get your shows, and listen to all of the incredible shows in that stream as well. All right. I think that's enough podcast business. We have a game to preview, and I am so excited for this episode. We've got Melissa sitting down with Ben Parker of the Cardinal Sports Report over at Rivals to break this game down really in depth. I sit down and I talk with Bud Elliott of the Cover 3 podcast and CBS Sports fame to kind of give us a wide-angle lens about the Big 12 going into the season, and then afterwards we'll talk a little bit about Pro Frogs, which Horned Frogs ended up on 53-man rosters in the NFL as that season gets underway, and 3 football games that I'm watching this week. We're going to bring back those 3 games just like we did every week last season. And we're going to talk about those games and some lines that I'm interested in as well. But first, before we get into all of that, let's take a quick look at TCU against Stanford. This is a game Friday night kickoff, 9:30 p.m. Central Time on ESPN. Nationally televised game for the first game of the season for the Horned Frogs is never a bad thing. Time of night, West Coast game, potential for some sluggishness there, but Vegas does really like the Horned Frogs in this one. TCU is a 9.5-point favorite. I don't know if you want to sit on that or not. I think this is going to be a low-scoring game. The over-under is set at 59.5. I'm looking at something maybe on the under there, and here's why. Week 0 happened last week. There were 7 college football games. The under hit 6 times. That could be an anomaly. Could be early season offenses. Defenses do tend to have better, quicker starts to the year, especially in certain situations where you're talking about new coaches, new players, all that kind of stuff. But also, one thing that we have to consider are the clock changes in college football this year. There's a running clock after first downs now, except for inside the final 2 minutes of the second and fourth quarters. You've got the 2-minute warning, or as college football is calling it, the 2-minute timeout. But all 7 of those week 0 games, total possessions were down. I think there were only 14 in the Florida State Georgia Tech game. Points were down, and like I said, the under hit 6 out of the 7 games. Something to consider if you're going to start to throw a little bit of money on games as we head into week 1. The unders seem to be hitting early on. It'll be interesting to see when and how Las Vegas adjusts to that. We will see. But for now, I think I'm looking at that under of this TCU-Stanford game at 59.5. Whether or not TCU covers at 9.5, I don't know. TCU notoriously does not cover. Going all the way back to early in the Gary Patterson years, just doesn't seem like TCU is winning against the spread consistently. A couple things about Stanford really quickly before Melissa talks to Ben. Stanford checks in at 84th in Bill Connolly's SP Plus rankings, which takes into account returners, transfers into the program, strength of schedule, all these other kinds of things. Stanford is 84th, not the best. TCU, for reference, was 36th in that metric. That all those metrics were recently calculated after spring ball, once the transfer portal closed. Stanford also has 12 true freshmen in their 2 deep, so a little bit of a contrast from TCU, who I believe has 9 underclassmen in their 2 deep, sophomores and freshmen alike. And Stanford hasn't named a starting quarterback yet. There are 3 oars on the Stanford depth chart when it comes to quarterbacks, so I'm sure Melissa's going to get more from Ben Parker over at the Cardinal Report. Let's dive into that interview now. Melissa sitting down with Ben Parker of the Cardinal Sports Report over at Rivals to break down this matchup between Stanford and TCU. Let's check in with them.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Frogs Insider podcast. It has been a long time since we've gotten to do one of these, but I am so excited to be back on our Behind Enemy Lines series, interviewing an expert on the Stanford Cardinal, Ben Parker of Rivals.com, covering Stanford athletics. And he is here with us to preview game 1 of the season, a game that feels like it's been on the schedule for forever, and we are finally just getting to play it. Ben, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Very happy to be on the show.
Hey, well, we are super excited to get to talk to you. This game, this home and home of all eternity, it feels like these 2 teams have played quite a bit for teams that don't have any type of traditional rivalry. But we saw this game canceled during COVID, get rescheduled. TC will be traveling out to Palo Alto for a Friday night. We know that the students won't be on campus yet. School has not started, and we know it's a Friday night in the Bay Area. Do you have any idea what the campus environment, what the game day environment will be in that beautiful stadium?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think everything else is going to be normal, except I don't think we're going to see as many students for the reasons you said. They're on the quarter system there. They don't start school till the 20th. So probably a little bit lighter student attendance, but aside from that, it should be a regular, normal kind of after night game. I do know they're running a promotional for the school district, Palo Alto Unified School District. They're giving out complimentary tickets to teachers. So that's kind of one kind of unique kind of feature they're doing. But aside from that, it's just a regular Friday night opener at Stanford.
You know, and I don't think when I think of Stanford, I think of a super raucous environment, but that is a good thing. This is definitely a wine and cheese and chandelier at the tailgate crowd, but it's still a really good game day atmosphere. Plus, you get the beauty of that stadium. The sun should be setting right around kickoff. So it should be a great experience for those that haven't been there yet. We talk about the actual football being played. Stanford returns as much production as just about anyone in the country. I think they're in the top 5, maybe top 3 overall. that could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. This was obviously a team that was disappointed in last season's results, as was TCU. But they bring a lot of those guys back, and Troy Taylor's now in his second year running that program. What do you think is the biggest difference between year one and year two? Not for how this team is going to play, but for how Troy Taylor is really running the program and putting his stamp on Stanford football.
I think the biggest difference is one thing he keeps hammering home is the depth. So it's a deeper team, and I think there's a lot more confidence in the personnel that he has this year with returning guys and some guys they've added to just do more of the offensive stuff he wanted to do. I think there was times last year where he felt like he couldn't fully implement the type of system or schemes he was looking to do. And this year, there's a lot more confidence in his ability to kind of run the plays that he wanted to do in the system he wants to do. So I just think this year we're going to see, in terms of the types of plays they run, play calling, all that kind of stuff, it's going to be a lot more in line with what he hopes to do going forward. And he said that today as well. So,
I think I told you before we started, and everyone that listens to the show knows I'm from Sacramento, and Troy Taylor obviously spent a good chunk of time at Sac State. And so I'm pretty familiar with the way that he runs, especially on the offensive side of the ball. He's known for being dynamic and innovative, and running these programs. Sac State really overachieved to some degree in his early years and became a pretty powerhouse program in the FCS level. How has his innovation translated to Stanford? And kind of a second part of that question is, with the limitations of what Stanford is able to do recruiting wise, you talked about him wanting to get the types of players. Is he limited in being able to do that? Or do you think that they're giving him some flexibility and some opportunity to use the transfer portal and NIL that didn't necessarily exist under David Shaw?
yeah. So first of all, just in terms of kind of in terms of doing what he wants to do, I do think once again we're going to see more of what he wants to do. Last year, there was a few stuff he did where you kind of got a flash of like, okay, this is what we're going to see more of. But this year we see a lot more of that, of terms of the types of play calling that he wants to do. As far as just him getting the guys he needs, yeah, I mean Stanford has been they've been opening up the transfer portal, not to the same degree that other schools are, but every year there's at least 4 or 5 kind of key transfers they're bringing in. They got a really key transfer from Washington and safety Jay Green. Clay Patterson, a defensive lineman from Yale, who led Yale, I think, second all time in sacks, who's here. Josiah Galvin, a really talented inside linebacker from Northern Iowa, who racked up a ton of tackles there. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of like transfer portal stuff, that's opening up a lot more than it was. I think Stanford recognizes they need to be able to do that. And I think that as an athletic department, they're most willing to be most flexible with the football team, just because that's the big money maker. That's the most important team on campus. So the athletic department is most willing to, I mean, they're trying to help everybody out, but football is the priority for sure. And then as far as NIL, kind of same thing. The collective is picking up steam. It's getting better. I've been told it's kind of like mid tier the ACC for football. Okay. So it's not the best, but it's like not the worst either. But there's, depending on who you talk to, some people will say it's lower or higher, but like they're getting things going NIL wise to football. And so it's been a little bit of a slow process because like earlier this year, the athletic director, Bernard Muir, finally acknowledged the collective, which was a little weird because we had known about it for like over a year. So it's kind of like, dude, like, why don't you just acknowledge this right when it came out? But no, I mean, they're definitely warming up more and more to NIL and transfer portal stuff. And also, and their big thing has been the early enrollees. They're getting a lot more guys coming in early as freshmen that are kind of come in an extra, kind of 2 quarters in advance. So, so there's definitely things they're doing and loosening up that weren't available to Shaw when he was here.
It used to be that the carrot of a Stanford education was enough to get people to choose Stanford, but we saw this summer with Kennedy transferring. That no longer matters if you can drop a bag in somebody's lap to the tune of $1 million plus dollars, right? But there is still something to be said. And I think because of that education, this might be unfair to stereotype, but Stanford has always been able to recruit the offensive line really, really well. And anybody that knows football knows generally the offensive linemen are the smartest players on the field. How does this offensive line look? What's the depth like at that? And what is your expectation for their play as a unit on Friday night?
They ought to be better because like everyone's back. So I mean,
Yes.
So it's kind of like, okay, like you guys should be better because you guys are all back. Levi Rogers, 5th year center, anchoring the unit. Connor McLaughlin, 5th-year right tackle, anchoring that unit as well. And then, inside, Simeon Powell is a guard. And actually, who else the opposite of tackle? I'm blanking. But, it's a collective of the unit should be stronger. Jack Lehrer is in there too. So, it's a unit where I think they certainly feel like after having kind of gone through the fire of last year, that they should be a lot better. So it's like everyone's back, everyone's supposed to be stronger, everyone's more cohesive. They have a better feel of the system. So that's a really key unit for them, as it is for all teams. And they definitely ought to look better. But it's one of these situations where we'll find out kind of Friday night how much better they've actually gotten. But they ought to be better,
You mentioned that, I'm assuming you were at the press conference today. It seems like you talk about we'll find out Friday night. Do we know who Stanford will be starting at quarterback? I know there's been some potential that it could be any one of 3 guys. Do you have an expectation, or have they named a starter officially at this point? And what do you know about who will be taking snaps for the Cardinal?
Yeah, they haven't named a starter. So Troy Taylor was kind of coy when asked about that today. He was like, yeah, it could be any of 3 guys. It could be Ashton Daniels, Justin Lamson, or Elijah Brown. I'll say this. I would be very surprised if Ashton Daniels is not the starter. He was the guy that came with the team to ACC Media Days. So that kind of was a bit of a signal, I feel like. And from what I've observed in practice, what I've been able to see, he's been getting all of the QB1 reps with the first team. So I think it's going to be a situation where I think we're going to see Ashton Daniels be the starting quarterback. I think we'll see Justin Lamson come in some. And then who knows? Maybe he throws in Elijah Brown for some situations. But I think it's going to be mostly Ashton and Lamson, and then maybe he peppers in Elijah Brown a little bit. Maybe. But I would be very surprised if Ashton Daniels is not given the QB1 role, particularly since it's week 1. He's a junior, all that.
They have some talented guys to throw to. I think everybody that likes college football has heard of Elliott. I'm going to butcher his last name, Aomenor, but Tiger Bachmeier had a pretty good season. Tight end position seems like it's going to be pretty deep for that unit as well. Maybe some questions at running back and a little bit more of an unknown quantity compared to what we've seen in the Stanford backfield the last several years. How do you think the skill positions stack up just across kind of the power 4 of college football?
I think they stack up well. I think wide receiver is the deepest unit on the entire team. Elliott, as you mentioned, is kind of the star of the team, really. He's incredibly, just I'm kind of blanking, but really a vertical threat. I mean, the guy can just run for days, right? And he's just incredibly fast and is such a threat with the deep ball. And you saw what he did against Colorado and Travis Hunter. I mean, he just kind of took his lunch money from him.
And we saw what Travis Hunter did against TCU in game 1. And so to see Elliott go out and just dominate him like that, especially on that catch that we've seen a million times, was really incredible. Okay, so we got phone overheating in the Bay Area for you in the middle of your dissertation on the Stanford wide receivers. You had mentioned that they're the deepest unit on the potentially on the team, definitely the offensive side of the ball. We all know about Elliott. Tell us a little bit more about the rest of that group.
Yeah, so Tiger Bachmeier is obviously really talented as well. And he's coming up, both him and Elliott both had off-season surgeries to address, but they're both looking healthy now. Bachmeier in particular is looking a lot better. So that's good. But yeah, Bachmeier is an absolute stud and kind of the number 2 receiver in the room. And then after that, there's a lot of really talented, deep, versatile guys that they can kind of go to. Guys like Jason Rains, Moody Rubin is really good. Trying to think who else. Ismail Cisse, the Farrell brothers, both Bryce and his younger brother Chase. I mean, it's kind of there's just a lot of guys at that position. So there's a lot of versatility there. And I think they have a nice kind of blend of options they want to go to for speed, guys they can go to in short yardage situations. So it's just a very deep, versatile room with Elliott and Tiger obviously atop the list.
I mean, I really, really hate hearing that, being that TCU's probably biggest area of weakness right now is at cornerback. So that's going to be an interesting matchup Friday night that could very obviously, kind of control the nature of the game. Let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball. Stanford, under Shaw, under Harbaugh previously, was always a really sturdy defensive unit, generally one of the top in the conference. How does this defense stack up? What do you expect their strengths to be?
I think the linebackers are definitely supposed to be a real strength. Like a middle linebacker, they got Gaithan Bernadette and Tristan Sinclair inside. Both those guys are really are kind of the anchors of that unit. Obviously outside linebacker, David Bailey is a real star. He's coming off kind of a sophomore slump. Kind of his main thing is he needs to just work on his effort and like energy and hustle. He admitted that to me, which is interesting to admit that. But he's got a lot of talent and potential, so he's really good. And then they have two really good corners on the outside, and Zyron Manley and Colin Wright. So I would say like the corners and the inside linebackers. But then at safety, they got some good guys as well. Mitch Lieber and Scotty Edwards and Jay Green, who's a transfer from Washington. I mentioned earlier, like he's a guy who I've been hearing really good things about. So kind of similar to the offensive situation where like, everyone says they're feeling more comfortable in Bobby April's system. And so they obviously got to go out and prove that. But it's a fairly like well-rounded defense. I think the biggest like question mark is the defensive line up front. Like that's kind of the one unit of question. And Clay Patterson from Yale is supposed to be a major guy to address that. Tobin Phillips inside's another key guy, but I think that the real kind of question is like, what's the pass rush going to be like? What's the defensive line going to be like? And how well can they stop the run? Because that was something that was really lagging in the Shaw years towards the end.
Yeah. I think TCU's run game, we've been pleasantly surprised during camp, but Cam Cook will be the starter, and this will be his first year as a major, major guy in the backfield. TCU's offensive line has struggled in pass protection at the early parts of camp. So it'll be interesting to see both of those two units having questions, who's going to come out of that feeling better about themselves after week one. I normally don't spend a lot of time on special teams, but Jet Toner was such a special kicker for Stanford and seemed to be such a clutch guy. They're replacing him. They lose him. The spread on this has gotten up to as many as 10.5. I feel like it's going to be a much closer game. How confident do you think the Stanford program is in special teams when it comes to the place kicking and both the field position game with the punting unit?
Yeah, I think they're feeling good about it. Josh Carty last year was such an amazing kicker for them.
It was phenomenal. Carty. You're right. I'm sorry. Jet Toner was like way back a couple of years.
It's all good. It's all good.
Carty
was drafted by the Rams, but he was phenomenal. But the guy they have kicking now, Emmett Kenny, he seems to feel confident. And then the punter they have, Aiden Flintoff, was like one of the top kind of punting kind of talents in the country. When he came out of high school, he's a sophomore now. So I think that there's a lot of confidence in that group, but it's one of those where they don't know what they have until they actually see them in games, kicking. So
this is a week one, and it's always so hard to predict how week one games go. It looks like that spread, like I said, was at one point it was 10.5. It looks like it's at 8 now. Do you think that that's too many points? Do you think Stanford is going to surprise some people? Are they underrated? Are they properly rated? Do you think they're going to? I mean, I don't know what to think of TCU at this point, so it's really hard to say who's kind of got the advantage here. But overall, do you think that this is going to be a closer game than what the Sharps have it at?
Yeah, you said the spread is at what line?
8 now. It's going to come down to 8.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like not a bad spread. Like I could buy that spread. I mean, I could see Stanford making it closer. I could see Stanford winning this game. I mean, it's sort of hard with week one games because both teams are coming in so fired up and excited, right? And so I think this is a game that Stanford absolutely could win. It's just really going to come down to, have they actually improved from what they were last year on both sides of the ball. And I think also kind of quarterback play, how does that sort itself out? And then the other kind of unit too is the running backs. Got some talented freshman running backs. And we got to see what those guys can bring. So there's some kind of key guys that could end up having a real impact on the game. But it's kind of hard to know until we actually see them against somebody else before we can really make a judgment on that. But yeah, I feel like that spread is certainly fair considering what Stanford's coming off of. But if you're Stanford, obviously you got to feel confident. You're at home. It's Friday Night Lights. You fired up. Year one of the ACC era. So this is a game where I could see any number of different outcomes of this one. I think it's honestly kind of a toss up.
So last question about this game specifically, and then I want to ask you a little bit of an ACC question. But if Stanford wins, what has gone right for this team Friday night?
Yeah, I would say if Stanford wins tonight, probably the biggest thing is that they won the turnover battle. Like, I think that's really gonna be a key. It's always a key for every game, but like Ashton Daniels at times like made some kind of questionable throws and turned the ball over. So I think if and then also to the defense didn't force as many turnovers as they wanted to. So I think if you're kind of looking for a key to the game, I think like winning that turnover battle is gonna be really key. So if Stanford takes good care of the ball Friday night, and if some guys in the defense are able to force a turnover, whether it be fumble or interception, I would if they win, I would guess that'd be part of that formula.
If Stanford doesn't win, is it as simple as losing the turnover battle, or do you think there's something else that could be at play there?
I think if they lose the game, I mean, if they lose it depends like how badly they lose. If they lose, right? But I would say that would be part of it. Once again, I think if they lose, I would say that there was probably some turnovers that they wish they could have back. Um, and then also too, just like maybe the offensive line not being as improved as we thought as we thought it was, or maybe some freshman nerves, some freshman jitters. So there could be a little bit of youth and inexperience factor too, as well, if they don't win.
And then who are your predictions for week one, Stanford offensive and defensive MVP?
For offensive MVP, I'm gonna say I'll say Tiger Bachmeier. I'll kind of show him some love. I'll say Tiger Bachmeier is your offensive MVP. And then for defensive MVP, I'll go out and say Colin Wright. You know, maybe he gets an INT or something. I don't
Okay.
know. So those two
Perfect.
guys, yeah.
I like it. And then last question, obviously, I think that college football fans that get it are super disappointed and heartbroken over the collapse of the Pac 12, 10, whatever it was, 16. But Stanford gets thrown a little bit of a life raft with the ACC. There's obviously a lot of uncertainty, but to me, the bigger question isn't the future of the ACC. It's how is that type of travel going to impact Stanford's athletic department, not just from a budgeting perspective, but from a competitiveness perspective, when you consider just kind of the weight that that travel can take on student athletes, especially with the academic requirements at Stanford. How do you think the early returns are? Do you think it's going to be an issue, or will Stanford be able to be a school that dominates, not necessarily, the bigger name programs, but is in the running for the Directors Cup every year?
Yeah, from what I've seen with the schedules, it's not been as bad as I thought. I think that they've found ways to, from what I'm looking at the schedule, it's never more than two straight ACC games at a time. And I just kind of looking at the schedules for soccer and volleyball as an example, because they play more. Football is actually really chill this year
Yeah.
because 8 of the 12 games are in the Bay Area, so that's really
Yeah.
nice. But no, I've kind of looked at it. It seems pretty manageable. I think they've done a good job of like balancing things out. And so yeah, it's not ideal. I think they would obviously wish they're playing other West Coast teams more often, but one thing they can do is offset that with more localized non-conference opponents, right? So basketball, I don't think leaves the men's basketball team. Their schedule just got released, non-conference. They don't leave the state of California during non-conference play. So I think that like what you're going to see is just more kind of like localized non-conference games, less travel during the non-conference. And so I think when you average it all out, it will be more travel, but it also will be manageable.
Okay. And most important question in regards to the ACC, have you had the chance to get annoyed by SMU fans yet? Have you discovered that they are the worst?
I haven't yet. So
Surely,
I haven't.
surely, Ben.
Yeah, I haven't, but I'll take your word for it.
It's coming. I promise you that. Just you wait. Where can people find your work and follow you on social media?
Yeah, just go to cardinalsportsreport.com. That's the Stanford Rivals site. You could also do stanford.rivals.com. And then my handle on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube, it's at slamdunk406. And there's also a site account for Facebook and Twitter as well, just at Stanford Rivals. So if you go to cardinalsportsreport.com and click on any article, it's all there at the bottom. So
awesome. Really appreciate your time, Ben. Are you going to be there Friday night? Will I get to shake your hand in the press box?
yes, you will, Melissa.
Cool.
I'll be there.
Cool. Awesome. I look forward to seeing you Friday night. We really appreciate your time. I think this is going to be way more of an entertaining and exciting game than any TCU fan wants, because week one is supposed to be chaotic and crazy. So really looking forward to it. You have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you Friday night.
Thank you, Melissa.
Awesome. Great work by Melissa as always. working her preview magic. Big thanks to Ben Parker over at the Cardinal Sports Report for sitting down and taking the time to look at this matchup with us this week. All right, we're going to go right back into interview mode here. I sat down with Bud Elliott earlier this week. You know him from Cover 3 podcast. You know him from his work over at CBS Sports. He is one of the better national analysts out there, in my opinion, one of the best national analysts out there. He does a wonderful job covering all of the conferences, all of the football news. I think he's got a really bright mind with the way he looks at things. He also is big in recruiting. So you're going to hear us talk a little bit about TCU and the recruiting advantages that TCU has in the new Big 12. We're going to talk a little bit about where TCU stacks up in the Big 12. We're going to have a little bit of a Big 12 ACC debate as well with Bud, because he's a Florida State guy, as you know. So let's dive into that conversation now. Here's me talking to Bud Elliott earlier this week. All right, folks, very excited for this next guest. You know him from the Cover 3 podcast and his work over at CBS Sports. You also know him as a loyal Seminole. He fights the good fight for Florida State on the internet regularly, which somebody's got to do, right? Small fan base, they need someone to stand up for them. But the wonderful Bud Elliott is here with us today on the Frogs Insider podcast. Bud, thanks so much for joining us today.
Jamie, man, glad to be back.
Yeah, it's it's that time of the year. Football's getting rolling. Obviously, Florida State had a tough game over there in Ireland, but it's just nice to have some regularity back in the schedule this year. And I'm just glad that pads are popping again and that we're getting after it.
It's like farming, man, right? Like you spend most of the year just kind of planting and planting and like 100. Now it's like 100 days of go time. Let's
yes,
and we get to enjoy it. I think even those of us working in it got to remember to enjoy it and sit back and appreciate it. It's a cool gig.
It is a fun gig. And so let's jump into this conversation, because I know that Brett Yormark made some comments at Big 12 Media Days this year that I thought were particularly interesting, specifically around the debate that's going on about who's really the number 3 conference in the country. Is that the ACC? Is that the Big 12? He touted the Big 12's parity, top to bottom. The level of competition week in, week out is kind of giving the Big 12 the advantage in that regard. But what's your perspective just as you kind of look at the landscape nationally?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I thought Yormark was pretty smart to say that, because I think he knew that he had ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips pretty trapped. Because in order to lodge a true defense against that statement, which I think you can easily do, you would have to basically invoke the track records of the 2 schools, Florida State and Clemson, which are currently suing to leave your league. They are the 2 that have carried the conference for about the last quarter century or a little more, and have won the vast majority of conference championships. They've won 5 or 6 national titles in the last 30 years. So it's kind of weird because Phillips, I think Yormark probably knew that at ACC Media Day that Phillips was probably not going to want to be praising Florida State and Clemson all that much if he could, because they're currently suing to leave his league, and they've said some things about him that I'm sure he didn't like. I don't know if we really know how good the Big 12 will be, because we have not seen the Big 12 really without Texas and Oklahoma yet. And those from a rating standpoint certainly carry the conference, or did. And I will still watch a lot of Big 12 football because I enjoy it. I think it's a good brand of football. Like, they play a lot of really close, exciting games. I don't know if it's a brand of football that attracts a whole lot of casuals, which is really, to do big numbers, you need them. And that's sort of Brett Yormark's challenge. It's like, how do you define what a better league is, right? Is it your top? Is it your bottom? I don't think the bottom of the Big 12 last year was worse than the ACC, to be frank. I mean, like, pick your worst team in the ACC last year. Like, Pitt kind of fell apart. They weren't, I don't think by any real rating system, worse than like an Arizona State or a BYU or a Baylor, right? At the top, the top is where I think you see the consistent difference, because there's really, from a recruiting standpoint, there's 3 teams that kind of can get to that certain level that you need to really compete for it all in recruiting. That's not to say they always do it. That's not to say they always do what you need to do with those players in order to get there. But it's sort of like a SAT term, like necessary but not sufficient condition, and I don't really see any Big 12 team that is particularly close to getting there at this point. Now, I think certainly somebody will probably rise up, win the league more often, and then get a recruiting bump off that, I would have to think. But right now, I thought it was brilliant for Yormark because he can say something that I bet in his heart of hearts he doesn't really believe, and the guy who would have to counter it really can't counter it.
It's interesting that you bring up kind of the blue blood blue chip recruiters versus depth, because I think that is kind of where this argument lies: is which do you value more? Is do you value having 7 to 8 teams that can win your conference in any given year? Do you value having someone who's consistently going to compete for national championships? And I think that you're right. When you look at the Big 12 and the ACC, they're both kind of leaning in to option A or option B there. And you bring up recruiting, and I think that's an interesting point as well, especially without Texas and Oklahoma in the league now, because we've seen TCU kind of transition into some Horned Frogs talk here, be really the consistent number 3 recruiting school in the Big 12 to this point. Do you think that they have an opportunity now to be 1 or 2 consistently moving forward, or do you think that the parity of the league overall will maybe bring the pack closer to them at least for a year or two?
No, I definitely think TCU has a chance to stay on top in terms of talent acquisition now that Texas and Oklahoma are gone for a couple of reasons. We might have parity of record, but we don't have parity of geography, right? And where you are still matters a hell of a lot. Like being able, not every single recruitment is some $1 million NIL battle. That the ability to win the NIL battle of, hey, like, we got hotels for you on the weekend if you want to come over, from 3 hours away, so you don't have to make the long drive home after the game. Like that's a small NIL battle you can win. Whereas, like out of state, out of region, in some cases, like literally the Big 12, spans just like the ACC does, quite a lot of distance now. I think TCU financially and with geography still has advantages over like the vast majority of that league in terms of recruiting. So I would expect those to hold.
And when you look at what Sonny has done from a just position recruiting standpoint, he seemed to be really intentional, especially along the offensive line, of getting talent in bulk more than some blue chip one or two bodies. And what do you think about that strategy when it comes to volume? Not necessarily quantity over quality, but just the volume of guys he's bringing in along the trenches so far.
I think it makes a lot of sense, right? Especially at certain positions. The offensive line would be one of the ones I'm glad you highlighted. I think that's really smart, mainly because offensive line's hard to project, especially after those top few kids. Generally, there's something that needs to happen to the player. Either he needs to grow, or and maybe like get stronger, but keep that athleticism, or maybe he needs to slim down some and see if we can unlock maybe some additional foot quickness if the guy is in a little bit better shape, or maybe it's a position change type kid. The offensive line past the top X number of players, whatever you want that to be in the country, is really a projection battle. And I don't think that anybody is like worlds better than everybody else at it. Necessarily. I'm sure somebody is, would argue their track record's better, but I would say like over what kind of sample set, right? Like you're better at predicting crazy growth spurts than the next guy. Okay, cool. So no, I do think volume shooting there, makes a lot of sense. At other positions, maybe not, right? Like as somebody that reads a lot of beat writer reports, when I see running back by committee, I'm like, all right, cool, that works. When I see receiver by committee, immediate red flags. Like I would rather have 1 stud and 2 complete jags than 3 good players. Like college quarterbacks aren't good enough to go through all the reads and be like, oh, this guy's open. Like there's usually 1 guy they're going to feed and then maybe somebody else decent. So I think it kind of does depend on position, but I think volume shooting along the lines of scrimmage because of the projection aspect of it makes a lot of sense if you can pull it off.
So you mentioned that you read a lot of beat writers. I know you and Jeremy Clark were on your show earlier this year as he was breaking down TCU for you, and you've been, I know, an observer of Horned Frog Blitz over on 24/7 for quite a while now. But when you think about this TCU team in 2024 and the potential of the program, we've talked about the talent acquisition and all of that. Picked 10th, coming off of a 5-7 season, do you think that there's a ceiling where TCU could compete for the top of the Big 12 this year?
I do. Now, we know they've suffered some unfortunate camp injuries, right? So that they need to stay pretty damn healthy, I think. Like my guess is, especially at the spots with which they've already had guys go down, those need to stay healthy just due to depth. No team's carrying like 7 corners who can play, right? So, but yeah, athletically, like physically, I think they could match up with most of the teams, and it's just going to come down to like schedule. Do you get the right breaks? Can you execute in those critical situations? Can you play smart football? I mean, last year they lost some close games. They had some quarterback dinged up stuff. I mean, Hoover got dinged from whatever calls. So I think it's certainly positive. I mean, there's not a lot of teams in this league that I'm like they can't win it. Okay, Baylor can't win it, in my opinion. BYU can't win it. Arizona State can't win it. I really don't think Colorado can win it ultimately. Who is there? Am I missing somebody who definitely cannot win it? Who I should be naming here?
See, that's the question, right? I mean,
probably Cincinnati, because Cincinnati's already lost
Cincy.
They already lost 2 starting D linemen.
Yeah.
I mean, TCU lost 2 corners, but like Cincy's lost 2 D linemen.
Mm-hmm.
So
it depends on your opinion of Texas Tech, I suppose. I think they've got some pretty good talent on the top end up there. Central Florida's lost a couple defensive linemen already.
All these Texas all these state of Texas writers, like love Joey McGuire in that story, and I'm like, I don't know, man. 2 years ago, to me, they were much luckier than they were good. And last year they were a little bit unlucky, but they still weren't good. Like it's not like they should have been 9-3. I'm not trying to disparage Tech. I just maybe it's because I don't live in the state of Texas and I don't see certain things, I guess. But I can't write them off. Certainly, like if Morton is healthy and the defense actually is improved and maybe the offensive line can hold up, sure. So how many teams are in the Big 12? 16, 17?
16, yeah.
And we could only truly cross off 5, I think. Arizona State, BYU, Baylor, Colorado, Cincinnati.
Yeah.
It's like 11 teams that you could actually make a plausible argument that they could win.
It's pretty crazy. And you talk about injuries, and Morton and Hoover have dealt with their fair share. Cam Rising over at Utah hasn't played in 2 years, right? I mean, we haven't seen Jaden Daniels stay healthy out at Kansas for a full season quite yet. I mean, health, I think, is going to play as much a part of this as talent when you talk about how wide open the league is. But when you look at the Big 12, who would you identify maybe as one or two of the real true front runners in the conference this year?
I think Utah is, and I know they're the betting favorite, whatnot. But if Rising is healthy and back to form, that they may have a defense that's just better than everybody else by a meaningful amount, possibly. They had a lot of injuries last year, like a lot, and they still found a way to play good football. So I think Whittingham is just kind of a wizard, and they're always going to be tough. I think the schedule's really, really favorable for them. So I think you have to go Utah, and then there's probably a next group of like Kansas State. A lot of people like Iowa State. I think they're kind of being priced close to the top of their range, but I understand the projection of them being better because last year to start was such a circus, right? Like the gambling suspensions, and all of a sudden they're playing a freshman in Beck, Beck. Yeah, sorry. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden he's good, and I would also take a look at Oklahoma State. So I bet Oklahoma State last year at 60-1 to win the Big 12, and was able to hedge that out against Texas because I was like, I bet them more on schedule, not on the fact that I think they can actually beat Texas because athletically Texas is kind of different than everybody else. I think. Although Oklahoma did beat them. But Oklahoma State was not that good last year. They were mainly just like, I bet them because of the schedule and because I thought they were just slightly better than most of the teams on their schedule. This year, they could actually be good. They returned like 18 starters. I know they think the receivers are way better than they were last year, I think due to health. Like if that's the case, if Oklahoma State is like a real passing game where you really have to be afraid of the receivers, then like I know they lost. I thought they lost somebody to the portal, but they weren't worried about it at all from doing the summer school, if I recall. So that could be one. I would say kind of those as like the front runners to me.
And you're talking about another quarterback there, Alan Bowman, who's going to file for retirement soon, and is health, right? I mean,
he's like 27, 28 years old.
He's closer to my age than the freshman on the team, I think, and he's one of those kids where he was healthy last year. Was banged up a little bit at Tech before he transferred. Quarterback health, I'm so interested in following just the QB health storylines in the Big 12 this year because I mean, there's so much top. It feels like the ceiling for a lot of these guys is really, really high.
I wanted to just like take half of these teams and bet their alt line under for the season because like, all right, like given this track record of health for these teams, a couple of these guys are not going to make it through the year. Right, and their seasons are going to be like meaningfully worse than we all think they're going to be right now. I just don't know who it's going to be. Mm-hmm. But also, most of them who we are like, oh, this guy can't stay healthy, but they're also like really good. You know, like Daniels when he's good is a beast. Morton when he's good for a young guy was pretty good. I thought Hoover showed some nice moments when he was healthy. You know, shoot, I'm probably missing. Like Shador got beat up last year, really bad at Colorado. I mean, that's not a Big 12 guy last year, but he is now. I agree.
Noah Fafita, right? I mean,
right?
At Arizona, yeah.
I mean, Fafita is really, really good. I think he's got a chance to set some like college records because he's like 5'8" flat. So I don't think he's going to be a pro, you know, at that size. So I think like Arizona might have him for like 3 more years.
And we haven't even mentioned, you know, KJ Jefferson's in the conference now out at UCF. I mean, just the quarterback depth this year seems to have jumped from a year ago, even despite losing Oklahoma and Texas, which I think is really good for the league overall.
I think the SEC and the Big 12 have like very good depth of competent to like pretty damn good quarterbacking this year. Whereas the Big 10 feels really top heavy to me. It's one of the reasons why I think like the preseason favorites in the Big 10 are likely to hold serve, because I don't really know that the middle tier teams have the quarterback play to jump up and bite somebody and pull the upset. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I fully agree with that. So back to TCU for a second. You mentioned you liked some of what you saw from Hoover last year. I you know, watching him this fall after he missed spring with that injury, I think he's coming along nicely in the year 2 of the Kendall Briles offense. But when we think about you know, win totals for TCU this year, I know I listened to your episode where you guys picked all your win totals and you were favorable towards the Frogs more so than your co-hosts over there at Cover 3. What was it about TCU at that point that made you choose the over on 7.5? And are you standing by that right now?
I don't think I'm going to stand by 7.5 right now because of the corner stuff. I mean, like that.
Fair.
I mean, if you lose, what is their corner 1 and they're starting nickel, right?
Yep.
That's a lot. Like, I mean, those guys were starting for a reason. Now, I'm not saying the drop off has to be immense, but like just if you just factor in that plus the natural attrition you get during the season, and you just spoke about the quarterback stuff, I would still consider playing over on a 7.5 to the over is a little tougher when you lose, you know, that much on defense in the preseason. But I do like some of these games that they have to play, right? Like they get Texas Tech at home, which is nice. Now the trip to Utah is very tough. I think that's the best home field advantage in the Big 12. Actually, by some ways that I measure it, is the hardest in the sport. So that's a really tough road trip. I know they get the bye before, so that does help. But I mean, you get Houston at Kansas. I don't think is that tough, at least in terms of stadium type stuff, because it's Kansas. They're not at their normal stadium. They're playing like some of their games at that like community college.
This one's going to be at Arrowhead. Yeah.
See, and like that's not that close. Like, how many people are going to show up for that? Right. I'm not saying it's total neutral site, but it's not a huge home field advantage. I don't think. I mean, at Baylor, I know Waco's not like close to everything, but it's not totally out of the way for TCU. You can get there, right? You're not leaving the state much there. And at Cincinnati, we just spoke about it, they already suffered quite a bit of attrition. So if you're still in it and you're still motivated, like at Cincinnati's a game I think you could go get. I like having Arizona at home, not having to go play in the desert. That's kind of nice. I like having UCF at home. The opener seems a little tricky, though. I will say, I mean, this coach for Stanford is that guy can coach. He won and looked really good at Sac State. Stanford shown some like signs of life last. I think TCU is going to have to actually play well to win.
I agree with that. I think the line's moved almost all the way up to 10 for that one in TCU's favor. I think I'm going to probably stay away from that and play more around with the over-under. I think it's at around 58.5. I like the under in that one just because there's so many unknowns. But you're right. Elliott Mayor is a phenomenal receiver. We've talked a little bit about the corner losses for TCU with Avery Hellman, Vernon Glover out for the year. I think for TCU this year consistently it's going to come down to pressure. How much pressure can they get on opposing QBs? Like you said, with the depth at quarterback in this league, pressuring quarterbacks, getting them off their timing, getting them out of the pocket is going to be really critical. And I agree. I like getting Arizona at home. I like getting UCF at home. Utah, you could probably chalk that one up in the wrong direction for TCU. And I agree with you. I love the atmosphere there. I was actually there in, I think it was 2008, the year Utah won the Sugar Bowl.
Oh, yeah.
It was my junior year at TCU. And so some buddies of mine flew up for that game. It was on a Thursday night. TCU lost it 13-10. Ross Evans, I think, missed 3 field goals in that game for the Horned Frogs. It was absolutely brutal. And then the next day, if you'll recall, Bud, that was when all of the rumors about Gary Patterson going to Kansas State cropped up.
Okay.
And so it was just this terrible weekend up in Salt Lake City for Horned Frog fans who made the trip. But, looking forward to getting back up there this year, hopefully with a better result for sure.
It's a cool atmosphere for sure.
Yeah,
it's. I will say in the Stanford game, I've been reading a lot of the practice reports. The Mosley kid for Stanford apparently is the other receiver they signed, the true freshman, has really shined in their camp as well when healthy. So I'm excited to see him.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this game. Stanford's I think got 12 true freshmen in their 2 deep going into week 1. So it kind of tells you where,
including a quarterback.
Yeah, and it tells you where they are in their development cycle. But I think coaching hire was for the long term. So I think Cardinal's going to be in good shape moving forward. But appreciate you coming on. Appreciate the insight from a national perspective. It's always good to kind of give us a wide angle lens every now and then because, beat writers, we can get into that loop of just only focusing on having our blinders on. And so I appreciate the time, man.
Jamie, enjoyed it, man. Good seeing you.
Guys. Appreciate you. Awesome. So thankful for Bud to take the time out of what I know is an insanely busy week for him, week 1 of the college football season, to sit down and chat. Super thankful for all he does for the network over here at CBS Sports and 24/7. And obviously, if you haven't yet, you need to subscribe to the Cover 3 podcast with him. It's one of the best podcasts out there for college football coverage. All right, let's jump in to a little bit of Frogs in the NFL talk. Obviously, all of the 53-man rosters in the NFL happened this week. All of the teams cut down ahead of the season to their final rosters, which means that there were a lot of hard decisions that NFL teams had to make. A lot of Horned Frogs ended up on the right side of those decisions, starting with Brandon Coleman. Early pick for the Washington Commanders in the NFL draft earlier this year. He seems to have solidified himself as one of the starting tackles on the Commanders. A lot of really positive news about him coming out of Washington this fall camp. Excited to see what Brandon does for that offensive line. I hope he has great success every single week, even if the Cowboys maybe beat the Commanders twice this year. Hopefully that happens. But so excited for Brandon to come out and immediately earn a starting spot as a rookie. That's a big deal. And TCU has a tendency to put offensive linemen in the league. We saw that last year with Steve Avila. We're going to talk about a couple other offensive linemen as well here in a second. But TCU with a reputation of putting good offensive linemen in the league, and Brandon Coleman seems to be the latest in that trend. Speaking of offensive linemen, Matt Pryor makes the 53-man roster up in Chicago with the Bears. He's going to be protecting rookie quarterback Caleb Williams up there. I think he's going to get the nod at right guard, if I saw that correctly earlier this week. Austin Schlottman is in a backup role with the New York Giants after spending last year on and again, off again, starting at center for the Minnesota Vikings. Josh Newton, this is one of my favorites. Fig makes the 53-man roster after being drafted in the 5th round by the Cincinnati Bengals. He is one of 5 corners on the roster in Cincinnati. He worked his tail off this fall. He had a great fall camp, an excellent fall camp, and has been rewarded with making the 53-man roster. Super hyped for Josh Newton. That's really, really cool. Meanwhile, Trey Merrick is in year 4 with the now Las Vegas Raiders, and he's going to assume another starting role at safety this year. D. Winters is in year 2 with the San Francisco 49ers and seems to really be solidifying himself as Fred Warner's backup. I know he started alongside Fred Warner a little bit this fall as well, getting some reps with the ones. So it looks like D. Winters is acclimating quite well to life in the NFL as he enters year 2. Ardarius Washington in line to start at safety for the Baltimore Ravens. John Harbaugh had some really good things to say about Washington this fall, talking about his ability to play both safety positions, to slide over to the nickel corner if he needs, and even play dime if he needed to in a pinch, just because of how well he knows that Baltimore defense. That's high praise from Harbaugh about Ardarius Washington. Kevontae Turpin will lead the Cowboys in the return game this year and also probably see some time at slot. With the current state of the Cowboys wide receiver room, it's looking like they're giving Turpin more and more opportunities to be a pass catcher and not just a kick returner, which I think is really exciting for his career. Hopefully he has a good year with the Cowboys. I'm definitely not overly invested in that or anything. Let's see. Let's keep going down the list here. Andy Dalton is in Carolina with the Panthers for another year. He will be a backup quarterback as he enters, I believe, year 15 in the league. What a long and really great career for Andy Dalton. Underappreciated, I think, for how well he's done in the NFL. Jared Wiley, another rookie making a 53-man roster for the Horned Frogs up in Kansas City, drafted in the 4th round by the Chiefs. I couldn't imagine a better situation for Jared than to end up in Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. If you're on social media at all, you saw him making a ton of plays, catching tons of passes from Mahomes in camp this year. Excellent situation for him up there in KC. Super excited for him. Less excited for Kendre Miller, who's going to start the year for the Saints on the IR, which means he's going to miss the first 4 games of the year with a hamstring injury. And there seems to be some sort of interesting dynamic going on with Miller and head coach Dennis Allen down there in New Orleans, because every time Dennis Allen talks about Kendre Miller, he talks about the injuries. And it's not in that typical way where a head coach talks about injuries. It's it feels personal. It feels pointed when he's talking about Kendre Miller's injuries. A little odd, a little weird from Dennis Allen down there. But let's be honest, it's probably just feeling some of the pressure of that job. He is on one of the hotter seats in the NFL this year, Dennis Allen is. And so it could be that Kendre Miller outlasts Dennis Allen in New Orleans. Trey Tomlinson, some bad news for him is he was placed on season-ending injured reserve, which means he's not going to play for the LA Rams at all this year, which is disappointing. He had a decent year 1. I know he had a really good fall before he went down with an injury. So year 2 is scrapped for Tomlinson, as he's going to miss the year with an injury. Rams teammates, though, Steve Avila and Joe Noteboom, are both going to start on the offensive line, which means 2/5 of the Rams O-line will be TCU Horned Frogs. Again, going back to that trend of TCU putting linemen in the league. Pretty cool to see. Quentin Johnston seems to have made some good plays in camp this fall. Still some questions about his pass catching, his consistency with his hands, but I mean, some of the clips we saw on socials, he's up, great catch radius like we know, making one-handed catches in the end zone, really a force physically. Hopefully he's starting to figure it out there in LA with the Chargers. Hopefully he's building that connection with Justin Herbert. Want to see him have a really successful season too. Another Horned Frog out there with the Chargers, Darius Davis, had another good preseason. He had like a 70-yard touchdown run against the Cowboys in one game. He's going to be the lead kick returner for the Chargers, and it looks like he's also getting some plays drawn up for him in the offense as well, which is really, really cool to see him kind of as one of those speed specialists, if you will. LJ Collier, Amari DiMercado both make the roster out in Arizona for the Cardinals as they continue to do good things in the NFL. Jerry Hughes, another long-time NFL player, enters year 2 with the Houston Texans and his 14th season overall in the league at defensive end. Jerry Hughes, I mean, just what can you say about the guy? I remember watching him when I was in college, and he was in college. And so that's how old I am and how old Jerry Hughes is. But Jerry Hughes is still absolutely rocking it. Dylan Horton is going to start the year on the non-football injury list for the Houston Texans. He fought, if you remember, stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma this offseason and is currently cancer-free. He's been cancer-free since May. What a wonderful story. Glad Dylan is healthy. Hopefully he's recovering and will be back on the field soon now that he is cancer-free. A couple Horned Frogs on the practice squads as well. Mark Perry ends up on the practice squad with the Dolphins after working out with them all fall. Ty Summers, similar situation with the Giants. Lucas Niang, 3rd-round pick for the Chiefs several years ago, has been cut and has been picked back up on their practice squad. So he's an offensive lineman on the practice squad for the Chiefs. And then Miller Bradford is on the practice squad for the Saints. That's a good number of Horned Frogs, y'all, in the NFL. A lot in situations where they can be big contributors, and big contributors earlier in their career than a lot of rookies have the chance to do. Super cool for all of those guys. Obviously, we'll be keeping track of their performance all year here on the podcast, and I typically like to tweet out a lot of their clips as well when I see them come through on Sundays, so keep an eye there and keep an eye here for all of that fun TCU Horned Frogs in the pros content. Okay, last thing, let's jump into it. 3 games that I am watching this weekend. With TCU playing on a Friday night, it makes this exercise a little bit easier because I'll have my Saturday completely freed up to just sit and watch football. I'm sure that there won't be anything that interrupts me, not 2 small children, not my wife, not anything. I will just be able to watch football all day peacefully. I'm sure that's what's going to happen exactly right, the way I want it. Just kidding, I love my family. All right, moving on. First game, Penn State at West Virginia. This is one that I'm super, super interested in watching. The Mountaineers are 8.5-point underdogs at home to the Nittany Lions. This is a big rivalry game, although I think Penn State would say it's not a rivalry. West Virginia treats it like a rivalry. West Virginia obviously coming off of a 9-win season last year, their first 9-win season since 2016. Neil Brown gets the contract extension, buyout lower, 1-2 punch this offseason. It's a 1-year extension that lowers his buyout. You can kind of see the signs there, taking advantage of a season to give him an extra year of stability, but also lowering their risk if 2024 doesn't work out. I'm excited, though, to see this run game, which should be really, really good this year for West Virginia, go up against what I'm assuming will be a very good Penn State defense. 8.5 points, like I said, is what Penn State is laying on this game. I think I like West Virginia to cover. Like I said, shorter games because of the clock situation in college football this year. West Virginia likes to run the football. Penn State likes to run the football. Both are relatively one-dimensional offenses on the ground. I think we're going to see a lot of clock burned. I think we're going to see a close contest. I think West Virginia keeps it within a touchdown. I did not look up the over-under on this game, but if it's above 50, I'm taking the under 100%. 100%. That one's at 11 a.m. on Fox is when you can tune into that, 11 a.m. Central Time. Miami at Florida is another game that I'm watching during week 1. This is two coaches that are on the hot seat. Obviously, you've got Billy Napier at Florida. You've got Mario Cristobal at Miami. Neither fan base seems incredibly pleased with their head coach at this point, and it's a rivalry game in week 1. It's the beginning of an absolute gauntlet of a schedule for Billy Napier in a year where he could be out before the season's over. If you're a TCU fan, watch that football game and ask yourself what could have been, because Billy Napier was one of the finalists for the TCU job when Jeremiah Donati and that hiring committee hired Sonny Dykes. What would life be like if TCU hired Billy Napier instead of Sonny Dykes? I personally don't really want to think about it. But that should be a fun football game. Miami is laying 2.5 points to Florida. That game is in Gainesville. Give me the Gators straight up in this one. I think Florida pulls it out. I think they're a little bit better than they were last year, and I think Mario Cristobal continues to make odd decisions late in games from a coaching perspective. That one's at 2:30 on ABC, again, 2:30 Central Time. The last game that I'm really interested in watching is not a Power 5 game or a P4 game. Yes, Notre Dame and Texas A&M play. Yes, Clemson and Georgia play. Yes, LSU and USC play. Will I be keeping an eye on those games? Of course I will, but everybody's going to be keeping an eye on those games. The third game that I am really going to sit down and watch with a lot of intent is North Texas at South Alabama. You obviously know that I'm going to watch former Horned Frog Chandler Morris to see what he can do at the G5 level. I think with his skill set and his just general chip on his shoulder that he could have a really big year at North Texas. They had a lot of roster turnover. We'll see how all of that comes together. Week 1 against the South Alabama team that beat Oklahoma State last year, had a really good year overall, but lost a tremendous amount of talent on the defensive side of the football. Has to replace their quarterback, has to replace their leading rusher. They're still getting 5.5 points they're still giving 5.5 points to North Texas in this game. South Alabama is the 5.5 point favorite. I like UNT to cover in this one. I think North Texas is going to come out. I think a revamped offense around a very good dual threat in Chandler Morris is going to give this young, inexperienced defense at South Alabama problems. We'll see. We're getting another look at Major Applewhite as a head coach. We'll see how that goes. I think this is going to be a really fun football game to watch. I think it's going to be one of the higher scoring games on the weekend as well, just considering all of the turnover on both of these rosters. That one's at 4 p.m. on ESPN Plus, so make sure you've got that extra plus package so that you can watch this football game as well. That's 4 p.m. Central Time on ESPN Plus. That is going to do it for this episode of the Frogs Insider Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Again, be sure to check us out on the YouTube channel where we are over 500 subscribers, which means we will be doing Smelling Salts on the next episode when Melissa and I are back together to take a look at TCU's hopeful win over Stanford. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever other podcast stuff is out there. Leave us a rating and a review, and share the episode with a friend if you want them to know more about TCU and Stanford as well, or if you just want them to hear that interview with Bud Elliott, or if you want to hear my 3 games of the week, you want to share that with somebody. Say, hey, this guy talks about football. You should listen. Do all those kinds of things. A big thank you again to the Flying T Club. Go visit them at flyingtclub.com to see how you can get involved. And as always, thanks to Dave Campbell's Texas Football Republic of Football Network for allowing us to go and do all of our shenanigans over there. For Melissa Triebwasser, for Bud Elliott, for Ben Parker, thank you for listening, and we will talk to you next time. Go Frogs.